Recording in progress.
I'm so excited we get to start reading Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is by far probably Shakespeare's most famous play, perhaps the most well read because it's assigned in ninth grade English for a lot of high school students. But it is so well known. It's in popular culture everywhere. There's been symphonies written about it and ballets, and in popular culture, there's songs that mention Romeo and Juliet, and then we have West Side Story, which is certainly borrowing from Romeo and Juliet. And it seems like almost everybody knows the basic premise of Romeo and Juliet. In fact, if there's a young guy who's super geeked in love, he's often called a Romeo, right? Somebody who's crazy in love. But if you've never read Shakespeare before, if you've never read Romeo and Juliet, it can be quite a challenge. So my hope and my goal in these videos is really to just be a guide, to say, look over here, look and see this, and look at this, and show you things in Romeo and Juliet. The first time that you read a Shakespeare play, it can be confusing, and the language can be tricky. So here's what I'm going to say. Get what you get. Try to get the big picture of the play, because this is your first read. I'm not expecting you to be an Oxford scholar at this point, perhaps someday, but just try to read it to enjoy it and get the story. Now, I might get carried away and say, look over here, and I might tell you something that's scholarly or dig kind of deep into a certain passage, and hopefully that will help you to understand it a little bit better, but by no means am I going to show you everything, because for many of you, this is the first read. And honestly, the best thing to do is to just simply enjoy it. But I want to give you a framework, if you will. Let's pretend that Romeo and Juliet is an empty room and you walk in and we need some furniture. I need to be able to put some things in place to help you understand what this story is about. And if you've read Shakespeare with me before in a different class, perhaps Macbeth, that was a tragedy. Perhaps The Tempest, that was a comedy. If you've been in Brit Lit with me, you've read Much Ado About Nothing. So some of you are coming to this with a little bit of Shakespeare under your belt, so that's kind of cool. But I do want to approach it perhaps as a first-time read for many of you. So what is the form of Romeo and Juliet? Form informs. It tells us how to read it. And this play is a tragedy. So no brainer. There's going to be missed opportunities and maybe poor choices and death. Death is going to be from page 1 all the way to the end. And so that's not a surprise, right? Like, we know that this is a tragic play. We also know that it runs on poetry. 90% of the play is roughly 90% is going to be in some kind of poetic form. Now, is this how they talked in the 1600s and the 1500s? No, this is poetry. It would have been poetry to them as well. So we'll kind of approach it in that sense. Romeo and Juliet was written in the late 1590s. Certainly not his first play that he wrote, but earlier. And Shakespeare died in 1616. And so this one kind of falls kind of in the early, I would just say the early ones. Every Shakespeare play is divided into 5 acts, and we'll talk about that more specifically as we go along. If you remember from The Tempest, Act 4 was super short, and that's often true of Shakespeare's plays. So let's just see if that kind of follows that form here in Romeo and Juliet. Now, William Shakespeare was a genius, brilliant wordsmith, playwright, actor, all the things. And for us to be reading him now, all these hundreds of years later, this man was a literary genius. And you can study and study and study and really get to know the plays, but there are even things in his plays that stump scholars. Like, I'm not quite sure what that allusion is to or what that reference is to. There are some things that are lost to us in terms of medieval stories, ancient stories, some stories that we have to kind of grapple with, or allusions that we'd have to grapple with. And I'll try to guide you through some of those. But William Shakespeare, he would take source stories or poems that he knew or stories that he knew, and then he would just rewrite them with his own spin. He would give it his own kind of flavor. And so William Shakespeare was writing at a time where the sonnet was so popular, hugely popular, almost like, oh, okay, I'm just going to think about Taylor Swift, right? Like, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan or a Swiftie, I think they're called, but I know I could recognize a Taylor Swift song just because she's so pervasive in popular culture. Now, that might not be true in 10 years from now. I have no idea. Will her art last? Who knows? But, and there are other people on the spectrum, right, who are Swifties, who know every lyric inside and out, have compared songs, and they just are so well versed in Swiftiness, I guess. In the 1590s, sonnets were the thing. And everybody knew and understood how to read a sonnet. And a sonnet, of course, is 14 lines. We've done those before. I think you've had to memorize. If you had class with me before, you've memorized, like, I think sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds and Impediments. Remember that one? If not, memorize a sonnet sometime in your life. The sonnet form was huge. It was a fad. It was super popular. And I think we still have something like 1,200 plus sonnets that have survived from the 1500s. But William Shakespeare did not invent the sonnet. He's kind of riffing on the sonnet and making his own form of the sonnet. There was a poet named Petrarch, and we'll talk about him quite a bit later as we look at a specific sonnet later in Act 1, Scene 5, and see what Shakespeare is doing differently. But here's some sources that he drew from. Let me just give you a few. You can write these down, take notes, if it helps you at all. But I'm just telling you what I know. Here we go. There was a story that William Shakespeare would have been familiar with from Ovid, his Metamorphoses, and the story was called Pyramus and Thisbe. And Pyramus and Thisbe was a story of two young lovers, and their parents would not let them date, talk, see each other for whatever reason. And they were neighbors, and their property joined up against each other, and their property was divided by a wall. And there happened to be a chink in the wall, a hole in the wall. And the two young lovers would go and meet at the wall. Imagine Pyramus on one side, Thisbe on the other. And they would look through the chink in the wall and they would talk. That's how they would connect. And of course, these parents are trying to keep them apart. Well, that probably only spurred their love on further. And they decided they were going to run away together. They were going to meet at a mulberry tree. And I don't know if it was the next day or I don't know the timeline exactly. But Pyramus and Thisbe planning to meet at this tree. And Thisbe, I don't know, gets there first or on her way, she encounters a lion. And the lion has just come from devouring animals, maybe a herd of cows, I think I remember from the story. And so his mouth's all bloody and his paws are all bloody. And Thisbe, she kind of is scared and she runs and she loses her veil. Her veil falls off. Well, the lion gets it and he's like tossing it around. And so, of course, the veil gets all bloody. Well, Thisbe runs, and I don't know if she makes it to the tree or not. I don't think so. She runs. Well, Pyramus finds the veil on his way to the tree. And he sees it covered in blood and mauled. And he wrongly assumes that Thisbe has been devoured, been killed. She's dead. And so he's forlorn. His love is gone. And he kills himself. Well, when he's at the tree, he kills himself. Thisbe comes back. She sees him lying there and realizes, oh, he saw my veil, bloody. He thought I was dead. And so she kills herself too. So they have these two young lovers who are prevented by their parents from marrying and even talking. And they meet up and tragically they both die. So that's the story. Shakespeare would have been very familiar with that. And you're going to get that flavor of Pyramus and Thisbe in the story of Romeo and Juliet. Another thing Shakespeare would have known is in 1562, so maybe 30 years or so before he writes Romeo and Juliet, this poem comes out by a man named Arthur Brooks. And it's called Romeo and Juliet, essentially, and is the basic story. In addition to that, Dante writes in Purgatorio. So in his Divine Comedy, there's like 3 sections. There's Inferno, Purgatorio. Okay, so in the middle of this story, he mentions these 2 Italian families. Now, I'm not Italian, but I like pizza, so maybe I can pronounce it. I don't know. Montecchi? I don't know. Capoletti? Do your best. Do your worst. Whatever. Try to pronounce those names. Well, from there, you can easily see Montague and Capulet. And so I think Shakespeare probably was familiar with Dante and had read that story. So there you go. A little bit of source story. So this is not original to William Shakespeare, but he's going to put his own spin on it. He's going to take this poetry, this kind of early idea about Pyramus and Thisbe, and he's going to put it on the stage. He's going to make it come alive. And this tragic death, this pain that we're going to experience as we read this story has survived for hundreds of years. And it is so worth reading. So I'm glad you're along for the ride. I hope you enjoy it. Let's move to the next slide, and we'll talk about the beginning of the book. Romeo and Juliet. It opens with a prologue. And the prologue's like the pre-story, if you will. And who comes in but a chorus? So this has some kind of ancient lit vibes, I think, because the ancient stories, like we're going to read Oedipus the King, they have a chorus, and they come in, they participate in the story, and they're kind of narrating and telling you what's going on. And so when we do read Oedipus the King, we'll kind of harken back to some of this stuff from Romeo and Juliet. Remember this, remember that. And the ancients also had this idea in their stories that fate will unwind as it must, right? Fate controls what happens. Now, there's some of that in Romeo and Juliet, to be sure. But we'll have to decide here if the responsibility of Romeo and Juliet's death is on them or if it's on fate, and they are just poor pawns of fate. So let's look at the prologue. And another thing, if you've never read Shakespeare with me before, that you'll need to remember. Hold on one second. I'm not sure if I hit the record button. Oh, I did. Hallelujah. All right, one thing you'll need to remember is that this is poetry. It's running on lines. And so it's not going to read like a regular book. In a regular book, you're going to read to the sentences to their end punctuation, right? And so you're going to see the lines go all the way across. Well, here it's poetic. You're seeing that this clearly is a sonnet, this prologue. 14 lines of poetry. But you still want to allow the punctuation to dictate the meaning of what is being said. So if you get to the end of one line and it's not quite finished, keep going to the next line. The thought continues in the next line. I'm not going to read all of the prologue or all of scene 1 for you as we get to that. I'll just kind of highlight some points, and then you're going to read it on your own, and we'll discuss it in class together. The prologue. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where they are seen. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their lives, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. Love this prologue. It tells you everything you need to know right up front in the beginning. But don't let that be a reason to stop reading Romeo and Juliet. It tells you everything you need to know. Something is wrong. Because sonnets, remember I said they were kind of like a fad in the 1500s? Um, they were about love. Sonnets were love poems, always. Petrarchan, who is like the, I don't know, like the Taylor Swift maybe of his day. Petrarch would write these sonnets. And he wrote hundreds of sonnets about the woman that he loved, Laura. And she was way off above him, way up high on a pedestal. She was perfect. She was beautiful. And she was out of reach. He couldn't reach her. He couldn't attain her. And so he's filled with pain and filled with agony. And so these sonnets, that's what they would be like. Well, is that what you heard in this sonnet? Look at the words that pop out in this sonnet. Mutiny, grudge, blood, star-crossed lovers, strife, rage. None of those things are shouting, this is a love story. So already from the beginning, William Shakespeare is doing something different. So if you look at the screen, the prologue tells us, whoops, wrong one. Let's try to go back there. Sorry about that. The prologue tells us that there are two high-ranking families that live in Verona in Italy. And they've had an ancient grudge. So ancient, right? Old. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny. So we have old and we have new. See that antithesis going on there? We have grudge and we have mutiny. Well, what's a grudge? It's something that you're holding against somebody, right? Well, the Capulets and the Montagues have held a grudge against each other for a very long time. And it breaks to new mutiny. So you think about mutiny, right? That's often referred to like a crew on a ship that decides that they're going to run the show. Forget the captain. Forget him. Off with his head. We're going to run this show. They mutiny. So somebody is going to cause disorder in the ranks, if you will. These families have probably been warring for so long they don't even know what they're fighting about anymore, right? So if the grudge is old, what does new mutiny make you think of? They're holding on to this grudge. And new mutiny, there's going to be a new kind of fight that's going to arise and bubble to the surface. Well, look at this line. Where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. That's in line 5. Well, civil blood, civil hands. So people who are just part of the town, part of the city, their hands are going to be covered in blood. There's going to be fighting. This beautiful alliteration in line 6, from forth the fatal loins of these two foes. You hear all that? That's great. So from forth the fatal loins, we get these two children who are born. Romeo and Juliet. Juliet is a Capulet and Romeo is a Montague. They are from warring families. Hence that kind of Pyramus and Thisbe thing going on. And they're star-crossed lovers. That's what the book tells us. Many people would say star-crossed means that the stars are against them. The fates are against them. And that's a valid reading. However, we've already got the word mutiny, right? So I think about people on a ship overthrowing and taking over the ship. There's a lot of language in this book about navigation and steering one's course, charting one's course. And there's this great navigational idea about measuring the stars. And when you measure the stars, that's going to give you the distance of the stars. That's going to help you. It's like a map in the sky that helps you how to navigate your ship. Well, the idea of star-crossed lovers could stem from this fate idea, but I like the better interpretation that it's navigational, that they looked up at the stars, read the map wrong, they didn't follow the right directions, if you will, and what happens if you miss the meaning in the stars, or if you miss the navigational signs in the stars, if you read a map wrong, you're going to end up in the wrong place. And especially if you're on a ship, you're going to crash. You'll be shipwrecked. There will probably be, torn sails and holes in the ship and people overboard and stuff lost. It's a mess. And I think that's what's going on here. I think I'm going to put that forward, and we'll see if we can follow that thread throughout the play. If Romeo and Juliet just tried to steer their own course without without following the stars, without following the map, if you will. We'll see if we can make a case for that. And the rest of the sonnet is going to tell us that the 2 hours traffic of the stage, so the play is going to be 2 hours, is going to tell the whole story. We're going to see it here. That these young lovers are mixed up, that they're lost, they're storm-tossed, if you will. They didn't quite get the right readings, and it's out of order. Their love is out of order. It's out of whack because of that. And then it tells us right away in this beginning that they're gonna die. They take their life. So, not a spoiler. At this point, everybody knows that's what happens to Romeo and Juliet. So you kind of get the scene set for you in the prologue. All right, what I want to do for the remainder of this video is just look at the first scene. The language might throw you a little bit. I want to show you some things that Shakespeare is doing and just get a big picture of what is happening. So let's take a look at scene 1. If you have the same book as me, and like I said, Shakespeare plays are all 5 acts. So this is Act 1. But within, looks like I left off number 1 there at the title. Act 1, Scene 1. That's where we're at. I don't know why I left that off. Forgive me. Act 1, Scene 1. That's where we're at. There can be various numbers of scenes within an act, but there's always 5 acts. And it opens with conflict. This is just like the sonnet is filled with maybe rage and strife instead of love. The city is filled with strife and conflict. And that's what you're going to see. There's conflict in the streets. The Capulets, the Montagues, they're kind of walking around, right? And their leaders, Lord Capulet and Lord Montague, hate each other. Well, that has trickled all the way down to the servants. And it starts with the low characters in this story. The servants are even part of the fray, part of the anger. Civil unrest plagues the streets of Verona. So the streets are not safe. Maybe you can picture that. Watch the news and see protests and unrest in our country. And that's probably the vibe that's going on here in Verona. That people are angry at each other and they're quick to fight. So let's just take a look at scene 1. Hopefully you have your book open. You can read along with me. And I'll stop because there's some things I want to talk about. So Samson and Gregory, they belong to the house of Capulet. You know that because the book tells you that. So they're Capulets. And they're walking around with their swords. They are prepared to fight. They are ready to fight. So Samson says to his friend, Gregory, on my word, will not carry coals. Okay, so carry coals here. If you're using a Folgers or if you're using a version like mine, Lord willing, you've got some helps because there are gonna be things that they say that we wouldn't understand. So to carry coals would be like a low level job, even lower than Samson and Gregory, who are servants. We're not going to be made to be mistreated or humiliated by any Montague that's going to walk around. Well, Shakespeare's going to have fun with these words. Shakespeare's a master of wordplay and homonyms all over the place. So these words that kind of sound the same but mean different things. And you can see that in Act 1, Scene 1. I even underline it in my book. I don't know if you can see that, but when you come across words that are homonyms or interesting wordplay, you can underline those and take note. He says, we'll not carry coals. And Gregory says, no, for them we would be colliers. So a collier is a coal miner. So of course if you're carrying coals, you're a coal miner, right? So collier sounds like collar, and collar, C-H-O-L-E-R, is anger. And Samson says, and we be in anger, we'll draw, right? We'll be in collar, we'll draw. Well, another way to use the word collar, and it's spelled differently. It's not spelled the same way. So I guess these aren't like perfect homonyms. They all kind of sound the same, but they're spelled a little bit differently. Collar in medieval or 1500s, that's going to be like a hangman's noose. That's what that means. So he says, while you live, draw your neck out a collar. And Samson says, I strike quickly, being moved. But thou art not quickly moved to strike. So they are ready. A dog of the house of Montague moves me. Like he's just ready to fight. And that's how this scene starts. And sure enough, they're going to come across some Montague guys who are comparable to them in terms of status. And they see him. And Gregory says, I'm going to frown. I'm going to frown as I pass them by. That's on 40. And I'm going to kind of race through scene 1. You're going to read it carefully and pay attention to it at home. But this is just for just kind of a flyby. Gregory says, I'm going to frown. Yeah, that'll get him, right? Let's not pull out our swords. Let's frown. So Samson says, nay, as they dare, I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it. So biting your thumb in the 1500s was a huge insult, very similar to a finger gesture that you might today that would totally offend someone. So he says, I'm going to bite my thumb at them. And sure enough, Abram sees him. I thought I had a slide for that. Abram sees him, which is a Montague. And he says, do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? And then Samson's like, is it against the law? Am I going to, if I tell him yes, that I did that, is the law on our side? Gregory's like, no. So Samson says, no, I did not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I do bite my thumb, sir. So they're just like, you can see the sparks are flying, and neither of them want to be the first one to pull their swords out and start the fight. But they are not going to be humiliated by the other side, if you will. And sure enough, they're starting to quarrel. A fight breaks out, and Benvolio shows up. Benvolio is Romeo's best friend. He's Romeo's cousin. And Benvolio, his name means peacemaker. If you read Much Ado About Nothing with me, we had a character named Benedict, Beatrice. Benedict means peace, like Benedicte, peace. Well, he is Romeo's friend and cousin. He's a Montague. So he comes, and he kind of wants to stop the fight. Let's see. They're fighting Samson, Abraham, Gregory. They're throwing fists. They're using their swords. And Benvolio comes in, and he says, part, fools. Put up your swords, you know not what you do. He wants to stop the fight. They'll get in trouble if they're fighting in the streets. And then in comes Tybalt. Tybalt is a Capulet. So we got 2 different teams, right? Team Capulet, Team Montague. Tybalt is feisty. He runs to the fight. He loves it. He's ready for the fight. And he shows up, right? He's going to defend his Capulet men. He's of a higher rank. He's nobility. And he's aggressive. He's Capulet. He is Juliet's cousin. And he comes in. And he says, what? Art thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn, Benvolio. Look upon thy death. So he points his sword at Benvolio. And he's like, I'm going to kill you, he says. Benvolio says, I'm trying to keep the peace. Put up thy sword. Or manage it to part these men with me. Try to help me stop the fight. So Benvolio is actually a good guy. He's like, hey, Tybalt, I know we're enemies, but let's try to stop this fight. So there's some wisdom here right off the bat from Benvolio. Sure enough, that doesn't work. And, I know what I was thinking in terms of a picture. I posted a video for you in Google Classroom to watch this from the 1968 movie. All right, so the fight breaks out. It's chaos in the streets. Capulets are fighting Montagues. Montagues are fighting Capulets. Citizens are showing up, and they're like shaking their fists, and they're cheering people on, and in comes an officer. And they're saying, beat them down with the Capulets. And then the other side's going, down with the Montagues. Right? They're sick of the fighting, but they kind of are cheering on the fighting. Well, in comes the patriarch, Capulet himself, with his wife. And he's old, right, at this point. What noise is this? Give me my sword. And Lady Capulet says, you don't need a sword, you need a crutch. A crutch? Why are you calling for a sword? Capulet wants to fight. He wants to join the fight. Montague comes out too, and his wife's with him, and he says, you villain, Capulet! And his wife's holding him back. She's grabbing onto his clothes, and he tells her, hold me not, let me go, I want to fight this guy. And Lady Montague says, you're not going to stir one single foot, right? And in comes the prince. So everything stops. The prince, he's like in charge, and he's going to lay down the law. And he says, Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace. This is line 79. Profaners of this neighbor's stained steel, will they not hear? What ho, you men, you beasts that quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains. What's a purple fountain? Blood spurting out of your body, right? On pain of torture, he says, throw your weapons to the ground. And hear the sentence of your prince. He says, 3 civil brawls by thee, Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the streets of Verona. That's what he says. 3 times this has happened, probably in recent history. And he says, if ever you disturb our streets again, your lives will pay the forfeit of the peace. So he throws down a law, throws down the gauntlet. Do this again and you die. That's what's going to happen. That's the punishment for starting a fight in the streets. So here's a law. You often see this at the beginning of a play. For Shakespeare, for ancient plays, there's some kind of law. And when that law is broken, that's where chaos ensues. So here's the law. Start a fight, you die. That's what the prince says. I'm going to skip just a little bit. Essentially, what's going to happen is everybody's going to disperse. They're going to go back to their homes. And Mr. and Mrs. Montague are going to say, where's Romeo? Where is he? Why isn't he here? Where is he gone? And Benvolio knows that Romeo's been moping. Romeo's in love, and it's not with Juliet. He has not met Juliet yet. He's in love with some girl named Rosaline. And he's been walking around. His heart is broken. He's that typical, remember I told you Petrarch was famous in his day for those love poets, the unrequited love, when somebody that you love doesn't love you back. And all his poems were about that. And they were in agony and pain over their love. Well, that's Romeo. He is the quintessential mourner, the man who's in love, the woman doesn't love him back. And he has been moping. Montague even says, we've seen him many mornings. He's weeping, tears augmenting the morning dew. So his own tears are crying, adding to clouds, more clouds with his deep sigh. So Romeo's like, he's walking around, moping. And they even say he goes into his room and he shuts up the windows. He locks daylight out. He makes himself an artificial night. He closes curtains. He makes his bedroom dark because he's so sad. He just wants darkness. What's wrong with Romeo, say his parents. What's wrong with him? Montague even says this. I think this is interesting. If you can look at line 144 in your book, he says this. Benvolio asks, have you talked to him? Have you tried to find out what's wrong with him? And Montague says, both by myself and many other friends. Everybody's trying to find out what's wrong with Romeo. And look at this line. Montague says, but he, his own affection's counselor, is to himself. That is key. I would circle that. I put a star by it. If your affections are your counselor, oh boy, this video is getting long. I've talked to you before about how the medievals thought there were 3 parts to a man: his reason, his will, and his passions. Well, your reason's on top and your will is here. And if your passions are on the bottom, what happens if your passions are your counselor? They're taking the role of reason. If your affections are your counselor, if your affections are leading the charge, like I feel like doing this, so I'm going to do it. Well, that's backwards. That's disordered. And Montague tells us right here in scene 1, his own affections are his counselor. So Romeo is disordered. He's being led by his feelings. Feelings are so important, right? And in comes Romeo. And he's not engaging with his parents right now. Benvolio says, here he comes. You see him? Step aside. I will know the grievance. Okay. If you need to pause the video, go ahead. But I do want to walk through Benvolio and Romeo's conversation because it's super important. And then our video will end and you'll get to read this scene by yourself. So, in comes, the Montagues leave, in comes Romeo. And Benvolio says, good morrow, cousin. And poor Romeo's the day so young. Right? Ugh. When will it be night? Ay me, sad hours seem long. So he is sad, sad, sad. All his language is sad. Benvolio's like, what's up? What's wrong? What sadness lengthens Romeo's hours? Not having that which having makes them short. Benvolio says, are you in love? Out of love? Out of her favor where I am in love. Benvolio says, alas, that love, and he means Cupid, so gentle in his view, should be so tyrannous and tough in proof. So when Cupid shoots you with his arrow, it strikes you, it hurts. It's painful. Love hurts. That's what he's saying. So Romeo's like, what happened here? What's going on? He says, it's important to look at this line. So I think we're at line 1. I wrote over it, so I can't read the number, 172 or 3. He's looking around. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Now, you've been my student for a while. You know contrasts matter. They're important. Hate and love. And he says this, why then, oh brawling love, oh loving hate. See those opposites? Oh anything of nothing first create. Oh heavy lightness. What? Heavy lightness? Serious vanity. Misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms. Feather of lead. That doesn't make sense. Bright smoke. Cold fire. Sick health. Still waking sleep. So we get all these opposites, right? That should tell you a couple things. One, he's out of order. He's not in balance. He's not in harmony. And it should also tell you that he's that Petrarchan lover. That guy from the sonnet Petrarch used these opposites all the time. And so Shakespeare is saying, look, that's what your guy in love is. That's what he's like. Benvolio says he weeps at Romeo's oppression, his good heart's oppression. And Romeo later says love is a smoke raised with a fume of sighs, being purged of fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed to see, nourished with loving tears. What is it else? A madness. Love is a madness. All right, so he's being a little bit hyperbolic. He's exaggerating. He's doting on this woman called Rosalind. He's a fool. He's acting like a complete and total fool. Maybe, guys, you've seen one of your buddies like this. They're so in love, they're Twitter-pated. That's a word from Bambi. He's just kind of in love with being in love. And that's what he's doing. Shakespeare is showing us that Romeo is in love with this girl, Rosaline, who doesn't love him back. Oh, there's so many things I want to tell you here. I got to cut to the chase. I will say this. Love in medieval understanding was often equated with sickness, being ill. Think about lovesick, falling in love. I think I have some more notes written down I should look at. What else? Sick in love, right? Like that idea of being sick and ill or crazy in love comes from the medieval time period. And so he talks about how he's ill. Romeo says, this is line 200, bid a sick man in sadness to make his will. Ah, word ill, urged to one that is so ill. He's ill. I'm done with this love. Now I'll just tell you, you'll read a little bit about Rosaline. And Romeo tells Benvolio, she'll not be hit. That means she'll not be hit by Cupid's arrow. She hath Diane's wit. Now Diane is the Greek goddess of the hunt, and she was particularly known for her chastity. And that's what Romeo is saying. Rosaline doesn't want to get married. She wants to be chaste. She wants to live like a nun, right? And that's killing him. He's in so much pain over it. And so as you read, that's kind of what you're going to see. And notice, right, the play begins with death. He's going to talk about death often. He'll say, do I live dead that live to tell it now? I'm alive, but I'm dead inside because Rosalind doesn't love me back. pathetic. He's pathetic. All right. Romeo says, teach me how I should forget to think. And Benvolio's like, give liberty to your eyes. Look at other beauties. There's other girls in the sea, right? I remember a time when my brother in our teenage years was so in love with this girl who broke up with him, didn't want to date him anymore. My dad was like, move on. Get over it. That's what Benvolio was saying. Get over it already. There's other girls to see. And then let's just end this video with some of Romeo's last words here. He says, if he examines other beauties, essentially, that he's stricken and he can't forget the precious treasure of his eyesight. Show me a mistress that is passing fair. That is fair means beautiful. Show me a woman that is beautiful. What doth her beauty serve? But it's just like a little note of the great song that Rosalind is, right? Rosalind's so beautiful. She's the song, and every other girl's just a note, one little tiny note. Farewell, you cannot teach me to forget, says Romeo. Oh, man. Just watch and see how fast he forgets. Benvolio says, I'll pay that doctrine or else die in debt. I'll die trying. That's what Benvolio is saying. Okay. Game on. Let's go. Let's find another girl for you to be in love with. So essentially Rosalind has rejected Romeo. Rosaline, or Rosalind, however you want to say it. She probably sees that Romeo is in love with being in love. That he's this kind of fawning fool over her and doting on her. So I think it's fair to say, just by the way he's acting, Shakespeare is showing us that he's kind of acting like this famous lover in the Petrarchan sonnet who just goes on and on and on about the woman he can't love or can't get love from. That's what Shakespeare is showing us, that Romeo is in love with in love. He's like reciting a poem, if you will. It's not real. That's where we end with scene 1. I'll probably make another video for scene 2 in just a little bit here, so that'll be loaded. God bless you as you read. I hope you enjoy it. There's so much. Enjoy the words. Pay attention. Take your time and try to get the big picture. All right. God bless.